Volume 2 Chapter 8. King Ramposa looked over the man who presented himself, Einsul gown. The description given by Gazif definitely fit this man down to the last jot and tittle. Expensive robe, mask and all, plus a magnificent staff of twisting gold with gems in the mouths of coiled snakes. When one heard the words Supreme Magic Caster, this was what they pictured. The king chose to stand up. You saved the life of a dearly treasured servant, and for that I am very grateful. Ramposa ignored the hushed babble when the king chose to stand to speak to the one who bowed to him. The sharper nobles understood that it was precisely because Gazif himself had been rescued by the guest of the king. The less sharp thought they smelled weakness in the old man. The sharpest, such as Marquis Reven, saw the old king reaching out across the divide to a new potential ally of great importance. A dearly treasured companion from long ago gave me words I never forgot. That helping the weak is only common sense. Your villagers were in danger and couldn't protect themselves. I did only what anyone with common sense would do. Pandora's actor said, and slowly straightened up to meet the expression of the ruler of Riastais. A sentiment worthy of embracing, but a difficult one even in good times. You can't save everyone, after all. Prince Zaynak said from where he stood a few feet away. Perhaps not, perhaps not. But I saved what I could, even if some were lost before I came. Isn't that how it always is? Pandora's actor asked, projecting his voice powerfully across the space between himself and the prince. It is, and it is because of that I am alive at all. An entire scripture of the theocracy driven off by one man is unheard of, Gazif said with equal force, openly praising the guest full of might, and the political winds within the hall shifted considerably. My magic may be potent, but my timing poor. I arrived well ahead of when I was invited, and I hope I may be forgiven for arriving without proper notice. If it requires more than a bowing of my head, tell me. Pandora's actor then bowed his head to his host, and the king was quick to respond. Not at all. Travel is often a dubious thing at best. All manner of things may get in the way, or everything may go smoothly. A few days or even a week is more than acceptable. There was no hint of disagreement in that, as every noble present had endured the challenges of weather, a sick horse, a bandit attack, or worse in slowing their travels. However, what set them abuzz was the king's next words, just to show that there is no trouble, please, stay as the guest of my house. In my palace, I can afford you whatever servants you require and my most luxurious apartment for your use until the feast. Pandora's actor raised his head. Thank you, King Ramposa, I accept your hospitality with gratitude. I do have a servant of my own who will be joining me shortly. I sent her ahead to acquire accommodations on my behalf, but, as you are offering your own generous hospitality, I will have her recalled at once. If I may ask, Lord Gown, may we hear the full story of just how you defeated the Sunlight Scripture? Marquis Reven asked with the greatest of diplomatic tones. Of all the nobility, he alone took the question of magic seriously. And the word of a magic caster who could defeat an entire slain theocracy special unit was cause for great concern. In the simplest of terms, my magic was greater than theirs, and my bodyguard stronger than theirs. Pandora's actor answered, I could be more specific, but, and not to be rude, unless you have a great deal of education in the field of magic it would make no sense to you. Eyes began to glaze over around him at the prospect of a lecture almost nobody cared about, but Reven's were not among them. Power lies in his hands that he is not revealing, and that must be addressed. The Marquis privately acknowledged, but he sensed the disinterest of the fools among the other noblemen and women. Later then, he concluded. The king seated himself again, and gestured to Gazif, I'm sure you two have to catch up. Why not take advantage of the moment, take him personally to a room, and we'll send his servant to him when she arrives. Of course, my king, Gazif said, turning to bow to his lord with an open hand pressed over his chest. Gazif took long steps away from the throne and looking up slightly to the masked magic caster, he put a hand on the arm of his rescuer. Please, come with me. As you wish, Gazif. Pandora's actor said with the utmost courtesy, and the pair exited the throne room. When they were alone, Gazif didn't delay himself in speaking. Thank you for coming, Lord Gown. He didn't care that he had no idea if the honorific he used with the magic caster was accurate or not. In his own mind, Ainz was a lord in nature and in power if not as a matter of law. You're welcome, But I admit, I get the feeling this is about more than proper thanks and a reward as a show of gratitude. Am I wrong? Pandora's actor asked, and Gazif's dark-skinned face showed a hint of shame in the way his jaw clenched. No, you are not, but please, when we're in your room, he said with a whisper, and Pandora's actor went silent. The rest of the walk was silent except for the sound of their feet and Gazif's armor. The hallway was polished to a shine and reflected the natural light which the high windows allowed to filter into the hall. Paintings sat at intervals between the windows, all of which depicted Riastais, and the royal family in particular, in glorious moments throughout its centuries-long history. Your country has a rich past, Pandora's actor finally said, breaking the unhappy silence coming off of the royal head warrior. Yes it does. I love this country, and my king. We've survived great and terrible things, won our freedom from the empire, and built something great. Gazif answered with a note of sadness as much as pride. Really, Riastais was once part of Baharuth? Pandora's actor asked as if he hadn't been more or less reading the warrior's mind. Yes, and we've had the same royal family since, but times are hard now. Gazif snapped his jaw shut after speaking, and held his tongue until at last they came to a door. Here, he said, and reached for the brass handle. He opened it as a servant would and stood aside, allowing the magic caster to duck under the arched door frame and enter the room. Thank you, Pandora's actor said, and Gazif entered after him, then closed the door. Times are hard, because our nobles are selfish bastards. They keep the king weak, and so keep us weak to the empire. Our war every year is draining us of our wealth. Our peasants die by the thousands and many harvests go uncollected because we have to pull them from the fields to go fight. You were right to ask what you did. We need help. Mighty help. Your help. Gazif spilled the words like they were milk in a tipped-over milk pail. Alone with the man that saved his life, Gazif went down to one knee and bowed his head. You saved a village because they were weak. You said that was common sense to do. Please, Lord Gaun, help my kingdom the same way. Pandora's actor fell to silence, taking in the request. It was the crudest and most direct of actions, far from savvy political maneuvers that he sensed intended from most of the court. A warrior, direct, to the point, and without games. Almost disappointing in a way, but honest. That is, uncommonly direct. I admit I expected some attempt to harness my magic, but nothing so blatant as that. Pandora's actor recalled his master's orders, commit to nothing. Gazif did not raise his head when he answered, I know, but I am a warrior, and my kingdom, my king, has no time for games. The annual war is going to take place in a matter of months, and when it does, thousands of my people will die, and thousands more will starve. Even though we will win, as we always do, we will lose as we always do. We will be weaker, they will be stronger, and my kingdom will be a step closer to total collapse. The warrior tensed every rippling muscle. I know it is shameful, but I must beg for your help a second time. Despite my rank, I am still only a peasant. I can beg for this without disgracing my king. I will consider your request. But you'll forgive me if I don't offer an immediate answer. Pandora's actor said with a slow, even speech that was more than the warrior could reasonably ask. I can ask nothing more. Hope is good enough for now, and it is more than I had this morning, Gazif said when he got up to his feet. Thank you, Lord Gaun, he added, and exited the room. Demiurge was in his office going through the reports of the shadow demons that had been scattered to the four winds. The slain theocracy capital of Kamimiyako, the Baharuth imperial capital of our winter, the Draconic Kingdom, the Roble Holy Kingdom, Riastais. It's such a big world and we have only so many shadow demons. His lord's wisdom made a great deal of sense. But finding worthwhile servants among insects was an ordeal at best, and even then, Nazarick still needed its defenses tested against forces in this new world, which was only adding to his stress. Albedo entered without knocking and sat down opposite himself. The two geniuses did not always agree, yet neither doubted the loyalty of the other, and the visit of someone whose mind could match his own was doubly welcome in times like this. She postured herself in a maidenly way, her legs pressed together beneath her white dress, her hands demurely clasped and in her lap, and a sweet, girlish smile on her face. Her wings fluttered pleasantly, the state of her mood was beyond question. You're in a good mood today, Demiurge said, opening the conversation with the succubus and setting down the document in his hand. Well yes, I had the most wonderful dream the night our Lord stayed in his room. It was strange, but it was also wonderful. I can't wait to tell him about it when he comes back." Albedo answered with a shiver of delight. "Yes. When he comes back. He hasn't spoken with you personally, has he?" Demiurge asked, his lips tensed with unhappiness. No, he hasn't. He seems to be quite busy, but the waiting. Oh, the waiting will be worth it," she exclaimed, her yellow eyes wide and intense. "Yes. I also miss his presence, but it troubles me that I can't see as deeply into his plans as I wish. I know he wants a rebellion in the Riesti's kingdom, and I know he wants to find a use for the lower life forms in the wider world. I would have suggested the lizardmen, but they won't work well with the human nations. Plus they are very few." Demiurge tapped his finger on the desk as he struggled to grasp the depth of his master's intentions. "I know, he just thinks so far ahead. I often don't know what I should do. He hasn't had us retaliate against the slain theocracy, only continue to pump Nigun and the others for information. It's very difficult not to accidentally kill such weak beings." She rolled her eyes. "Worms. But at least he's found a place for some of them." "You're referring to Kani village?" Demiurge asked, and Albedo nodded in answer. "Yes, we can conduct all kinds of experiments there. Cohabitation between lesser races, military exercises, strengthening weaker fighters to prepare them to fight for our Lord. And that pharmacist seems to have an aptitude for his work as well. Not to mention talents, Nina learns twice as fast as a common caster. The boy in fur can use any item without restriction, and there are clearly more, some of which may be extremely useful," Demiurge added. "Is that what you're hoping to find in Baharuth?" Albedo asked. "Yes. They and the slain theocracy are advanced in magic, as far as this world goes, but we need to know so much more before we can truly emerge." The Archdevil let out a deep sigh from his long face. "I assume that as why Lord Dines has stayed away for so long, he's saving us inadequate servants the shame of failing him, and yet I can't put my finger on it. Something else is profoundly different," Albedo said with a tentative air and tightened her fingers' grip on one another with self-induced annoyance. "Different?" Demiurge arched a brow. "How?" "Cocytus is aloof. Lupus Regina has, with one exception, remained even closer to our master than before, if I am reading her own reports accurately. Sabos chose solution to take to our winter. She blends well, she is a gifted assassin, but she hates humans, and so being around them is profoundly uncomfortable. A better choice would have been Oriolomega, or Uri Alpha. So why solution? He had to know she was suboptimal for this, and yet he chose her anyway and has not answered except to say, it is what is best. Over and over." Albedo clenched her jaw. "If my lord is having his way with Lupus Regina and they know about it, that is his right, but what is wrong with me?" Albedo shot her hand up and put it over her heaving breast, her happiness melting away beneath the stress of rising concerns that she had not yet given voice to until that moment. "Are they aware and staying back to avoid letting it slip?" Albedo asked and stared intently at Demiurge, the most cunning and far-thinking of the Guardians, and aware of her own potential for self-bias. She desperately sought his counsel. No, I don't think so." "Have you spoken to Shultir about this?" Demiurge's brow furrowed. The other candidate for wife to the one who stayed, she was as fanatical as Albedo in her own way. "No, I sent her out to search for a talented swordsman that was rumored to exist with a group of bandits east of Erantal. Supposedly he has considerable skills and was only ever defeated by the Rollhead warrior. He might prove useful to us if he is properly tamed," Albedo explained, and at that Demiurge could only offer silent agreement. "Excellent, even a common stone can have a use to the right craftsman," Demiurge suggested, and then added, "Don't spend too much time worrying about Lord Ines and Lupus Regina. I'm sure she's just cautious because of their situation, and the others likely just concerned with their own performance of their first outside missions," Demiurge said, hoping to allay her fears. "You're right," Albedo said, her smile slowly returning. "I'm being silly. Thank you for your words of confidence, Demiurge. I'll be visiting my lord's room, and I'll be there for the rest of the day and night. Let me know if anything of importance happens." "I will, just don't take it too far," he said, recalling the shockingly well-made body pillow of their master. She laughed when she stood up, then asked, "Demiurge, when do I ever overdo anything?" "I wonder." Demiurge reflected, but said nothing as she left the room, and went back to his reports. Albedo made her way to her master's room a short while later. Her iron's pillow clung tightly under one arm, and opened the door. Before the door even shut, she knew something was different. She raised her chin and sniffed the air. A musk was present, an unfamiliar musk, like someone else had been in the room. Someone male. The pheromones were exceptionally strong. She reverentially laid the pillow upright against the wall and followed the pheromones over to the bed. She went down to her knees and pressed her nose to the sheets. Her own powerful succubus scent was still detectable. Her faint spray of perfume was to be expected. But what was not, was what else she found. The masculine musk was flooding her nethers with desire, hunger, wanton and reckless beyond all reason, and she followed it from the foot of the bed, to where a tall man's crotch would have been, and then all the way up to the head. The height was perfect, the scent wasn't of bone, but of flesh, and the way her body was responding, with trembling desire on a whole other level. With the utmost devotion she rose, placed a delicate hand of impossible strength down on the place where a heart would have been beating, and Albedo felt a smile begin to form. Volume 2 Chapter 9. Pandora's actor, one of the three great geniuses of Nazarick, sat down at nearby table as soon as he was alone again. Next to the table there was a shelf full of books. A lot can be learned about a people by what they write. He mused and took one up at random. The Beggar Prince. He read the title and flipped through the pages inside, immediately grateful he'd taken a few hours to learn the written language of the region. They have a hideous written language, like scribbled spiderwebs. The supreme beings had a much prettier one. He judged, and went through the text. The fact that misfortune and nobility were featured so prominently within it was telling as to the state of affairs. Clearly it found an audience here. Pandora's actor thought, and after flipping through the pages, picked up another. He immediately regretted it. Why would a human be so lustful for a lizard woman maid? I'm visiting a nation of perverts. He immediately set the book back on the shelf, and a moment later a knock prevented him from reaching for another. Come in. Pandora's actor invited, and a beautiful young woman cracked the door and slipped within. He knew the woman immediately. Princess Rena. She was wearing a flowing blue dress that formed a bell shape below her waist. White ruffles ran up the long sleeves and curved down under her small, supple bosom. Her hair hung loose down behind her head and bounced lightly with every step she took. When she was a few feet away, she hiked up her dress, went down to her knees, and went prostrate before him as if Pandora's actor were her master. Your Majesty, Lord Demiurge informed me of your coming. I'm ready to accept your orders. All I ask is a life with my puppy. For that, I will work to give my entire kingdom into your power, Rena said with breathless hope. She could feel the power crackling around the monster of a being in front of her. Though Rena had no sense for magic, she had one advantage that no talent could replicate: supreme intellect. Lord Demiurge was unbeatable. Lord Ines was his master. There was no way to survive but to surrender completely. Father, my brothers, they're such fools. They would fight on principle and preserve nothing at all. She suppressed the contempt for them that she felt rising up, lest it be mistaken in his direction if it was noticed at all. Pandora's actor made a simple gesture with his hand. Raise your head, servant. He ordered and played his father's part. When she obeyed, he pressed her with a question. Who will come to me first? The nobles, or the royals? The nobles won't at all, master. I made sure that I mocked the use of mere magic as parlor tricks and let the maids overhear that the scripture was overrated. They already hold Gazif in contempt, so they won't give weight to his rescue. Only the Marquis Revan, my father, and my brother Zanak are likely visitors. Well done, servant, well done. Are there no nobles you want to preserve at all? Pandora's actor asked. He leaned forward and removed his mask, showing a chiseled human face somewhat older than middle years, but full of dignity and with sharp, piercing eyes that threatened to look into Rena's husk of a soul. She felt herself pierced by the dread gaze, but there was only one answer. None, though I don't dislike Zanak, he is nice to my puppy. But Barbaro. If you could make him suffer, I would be grateful. Your oldest brother? Pandora's actor asked rhetorically. She nodded with wild, rapid eagerness. Years ago, when I was little, Barbaro insulted me, and my puppy attacked him to protect me. So he had my puppy beaten up. I hate him, Rena hissed with her beautiful blue eyes narrowed to slits. Make him pay, make him suffer, make him scream, bleed, and cry for mercy. No one touches my climb, nobody mocks my precious, precious climb. Rena's hushed tones were accompanied by a body that shook with rage that had not abated even slightly with the passage of time, and it only stopped when Pandora's actor spoke. You already set him on his course to this, didn't you, servant? It was a rhetorical question, but she answered it. Rena's cruel smile seemed oddly well fitted to her radiant face, her ocean blue eyes glazed over and the smile took up only one side, her head cocked a little, and a little laugh preceded her words. Yes, master. Barbaro left a few days ago with 2,000 soldiers. He'll do what he does best. Behave like a stupid brute, make everybody hate him, and then... Good. Very good, servant. As promised by my servant, Demiurge, you will have a life with your puppy. It remains to be seen if that life is on the throne of Rheastais, or a little cottage somewhere far from power. But you don't care about which, do you? Pandora's actor asked, and she violently shook her head in denial. If I have my climb, I don't care about anything else, master. Rena replied with fanatical devotion to her dreams. Take my kingdom, make it yours, make it ashes, make it golden, only give me my climb as I can never have him now. And I am your servant forever. She lowered herself again and prostrated before the magic caster who defied reality, and pressed her forehead to the top of his shoe. As if to reassure her, she felt the wave of power crash down on her. It hit her back almost like a mountain, the entire room seemed to rumble and shake, and yet the Golden Princess felt no fear. The brief shock of pain was gone almost immediately, and the power was more like the comforting press of a weighted blanket. He is a god, and this is his covenant, his promise to me. She understood the wordless display, and it was all she could do not to weep with joy when she was allowed to rise again and depart. Ayn sat on the horse and looked over the walls of the capital. Merman, is something wrong? Lupus Regina asked, tilting her head back to look up at him. His helmet was off for the moment, and that kept the radiant smile on the werewolf battle-maid. Nothing, Ayn answered, but the truth was, it was still surreal. So damned military. Surreal. The easiest thing to accept had been the world at large not being a miserable poisoned mess. However, staring at the great high walls of the capital of Rheastais, he could not help but be reminded of the dark shadow that was cast over everything. The ever-present threat of war, destruction, and worse. Along the way, he made a point of passing through the route taken by the former adventuring team, the Swords of Darkness, and found just what he expected. A village empty of life. The houses were already inhabited by animals, the bloody dirt where Philip had been beaten to death had turned to dust, and blown away before Ayn's coming. However, the emptiness was a stark reminder that terror ruled the lives of the peasant class. The grey wall, which Ayn's was now craning his neck back so he could see the top, with its armored soldiers patrolling and stationary soldiers on the watch, was just another element of the same thing. The converse to the abandoned village, or the burnt-out husk of homes that still lingered in Kani when half the village had been exterminated. This world is on the same path as mine, centuries behind, perhaps millennia, but it's on the same road. He recognized what no one else could, the horrors that lay ahead. That was as unreal, as it was unthinkable. If I were still undead, what would that mean to me? Nothing? Or would I think the same as I do now? That in and of itself was troubling. The extremes of emotion were kept under tight rein, but he still felt himself in a strange sort of way. Merman? Lupus Regina asked again, her voice small and uncertain, the radiant smile replaced by the biting of her lower lip and a deceptively delicate-looking hand that reached from where she sat on her high, reddish-brown horse, to touch his forearm just above his hands. He tightened his grip on the reins of his dark horse and clenched his jaw. I've worried her. Oops. He turned his eyes down toward her and away from the wall, and gave her a reassuring little smile. It's fine, I was just thinking of something personal. Lupus Regina removed her hand from his forearm and tapped her nose twice in rapid succession with her pointer finger, and tilted her head to give him a more pleasant smile again. Ayn's wasn't quite sure what to make of the gesture, and eager to keep any awkwardness at bay, he gave a crisp command, "Come on, let's go." He then lightly tapped the spurs against the horse, and it cantered toward the gate. The gate to the city was wide enough for 12 horses to pass abreast. However, the guard at the city gate took a very practical approach to order and set up 4 fence segments that took the number of entries down from a potential of 12 to 4. The wooden posts sat in holes and had long horizontal wooden poles shoved through from a front pole to a back pole, and so kept people from jumping ranks. However, a VIP line appeared to be an option, an underutilized line that had a sign in front of it. On the sign was painted a gold coin, and below the coin, an adamantite plate. "We could use that one, couldn't we, Moman?" Lupus Regina asked, pointing it out. "Yes, but Axel has a reputation to maintain. So we won't set ourselves above others," Heinz replied, and got into line behind 20 or 30 other peasants, most of whom entered empty-handed, and a few of which had cheap packs or rolls slung over their backs. The special line was short, and those who entered passed off a gold coin to a trio of guards who simply slipped it into a box, wrote down a name and amount, and let them pass. It took some time to reach the front, and when they did, the guards, a somewhat lax group, immediately stiffened. Heinz already stood a head and a half taller than most, and his thick onyx-shaded armor gave him even greater height. Then atop the high black Percheron, he may as well have been a giant among dwarves. Lupus Regina tried hard not to laugh. Her long red hair hung down in waving braids that bounced as she cantered her horse beside her master. "Team Axel, Adamantite Adventurers. I am Moman, and this," he gestured to Lupus Regina at his left hand, "is my partner, Lupu." She shot out her hand and made a V for victory with her fore and middle fingers, and gave them a winning smile while she imagined peeling their skin. Their mouths opened and closed without words for several seconds until Heinz asked, "Is there a problem?" As if there might have been. No. No. Of course not, Sir Moman. Yes, at once, please enjoy the city. The guard who obliviously blocked the way squeaked out the string of sentences in rapid succession and stood aside. "Which way to the Adventurers Guild here? I should check in with my colleagues in Reistais as a courtesy at least," Heinz asked, placing his helmet on his head again. The guard shifted his feet and scratched his cheek with rapid, almost frantic motions as he struggled for an answer. Merchant District. Not sure exactly where, but it's probably in the square." "Thank you," Heinz answered, and spurred his horse forward again. Lupus Regina did the same a hair later, and they were within. "What do you think of this city?" Heinz asked while he looked around at the squalor. Lupus Regina put her 2 fingers up to her nose and closed them over her nostrils. "It smells. The city needs a bath." It needed far more than that. Half-rotted barrels sat beside the few sturdy buildings, shunted into alleys, and they were overflowing with garbage that was picked through by dirty, underfed children and adults alike. The hollow, sunken eyes of the waif-thin sticks that passed for humans looked at him as if he were some strange creature, while others looked at him with envy or hatred. Others looked at him like he might have something worth stealing, but with the twin greatswords on his back and with his considerable size, those chose to give him a wide berth and withdrew into the shadows of their alleys. "Lupu, what are your thoughts?" Heinz asked while they rounded a corner where a once intact fountain had so long ago ceased flowing that it had now become a dump for trash. Broken barrels, moldy sacks, broken bottles, and people who had either passed out drunk, died, or both were all lumped in what had held the vanished water. Lupu watched a dagger-wielding man with a cruel snarl on his pock-marked patchy bearded face withdraw under her withering gaze of contempt. When he was gone, she looked up over at her lord and answered, "Carney had toys I was starting to like. This place doesn't." From the smiling sadist who wanted nothing more than to see the suffering of those she actually liked, it was a withering criticism. Heinz wasn't about to argue with the sentiment. A people in decline. They see no future for themselves and, for now at least, they're not wrong. Still, they do have abundant human resources here. The city did improve as they went farther and farther into the interior, eventually reaching the merchant district. The buildings were in far better shape, and the hurried shuffle of those eager to be out of sight gave way to people taking a more leisurely approach to life. Beards became neatly trimmed, clothing clean, the smell abated even if it didn't vanish completely. Near the center of the merchant district there sat, true to the statement of the guard, a large fountain in the midst of an open square with intact streets around it. A quick question from a passerby who stared openly at the adamantite plate signs and Lupus Regina wore, and they found the Adventurers Guild. Volume 2 Chapter 10. "So that's the case, is it?" Sabos asked the shadow demon rhetorically. "Yes," the mouthless shade said after it finished explaining the situation. Sabos reached up with his left hand and stroked his chin. "Thank you, Go and resume your explorations. At once, Kki. It answered, and then in an eye blink it was gone. The shadow demon was entirely right. That evening Solution approached Sabos in the study of the manor and extended her hand to him. In her hand was a small cream-white scroll made of silk. A decadent and wasteful use of expensive material, if ever Sabos had seen one. They're trying very hard to impress before we even meet. He thought and slid the white silk bow off of the document. Unrolling the silk, he put on a set of glasses that would allow him to read the local language. True to expectation, it was an invitation to dinner at the House of Furt. Flies to honey? Solution asked with a disdainful smirk on her face. Yes, this should do. Sabos answered and slowly rose to his feet. Will you send a formal response? Solution asked. Her eyes unconsciously darted in the direction of the House of Furt, as if eager to devour those who lived within. No, let them sweat. Sabos replied, but I will get ready to go. This caused Solution to give him a brief double-take. That doesn't sound like you. She expressed her opinion, and Sabos turned to look her way. I am a servant of my lord, first. If setting them on edge makes my task more likely to succeed, then I will set them on edge. My loyalty is absolute, all else is secondary. You should know that, Solution. Sabos answered in a voice of iron. She looked away, briefly ashamed of herself for questioning the loyalty of a created being. You're right. Forgive my doubts. I mistook your... She briefly choked on the word, kindness for disloyalty. I will not make that mistake a second time. See that you don't, Sabos said more evenly. Lord Demiurge seeks the path of greatest harm because it pleases him, so he was designed by Lord Albert. I seek the path of greatest kindness, so I was designed by Lord Touchme. Both of us serve Nazarick first. If we have to oppose our own wishes to succeed for our master, we will. That is all, Solution. Resume your work. Even as skilled a maid as you can't be completely finished with this manor yet. Solution accepted the harsh critique and inclined her head to the head butler. The stern reminder was sufficient, and she left to resume the war against the dust. Where is he? Sefert growled and hunched over. He tugged at his hair. He hunched over so far that his forehead almost touched the dinner table. This is the House of Furt. We're a noble family whose legacy stretches back to the dawn of the Baharuth Empire. An invitation here should be beyond honored, he said with bulbous eyes that bugged out of his head. At his side, Madame Furt put a hand on his thigh. Now dear, he may be a foreign nobility, and being fashionably late is to be expected. She replied, but there was a squeaky catch to her own voice that betrayed her own anxious nerves. Her eyes darted over to her daughter and looked Arch up and down again as if appraising whether the offered gift was good enough. Arch did her best not to shudder. It was not an unfamiliar look. Her short hair was combed clean, and her dress tight to show off her youthful figure, though to a small degree of embarrassment, her bust was de-emphasized in favor of her contours. Her mother's words rang in her head, we have duties. At her left and right side, Quadruca and Eurerica were subdued. They wore flowing childish clothing of golden silk, a contrast to Arch's virginal white with its vibrant red ruffles that ran in patterns that came to a peak at her breasts, concealing her relative smallness. Everything will be fine, mother, father, just fine. Arch spoke to her parents, but her hands beneath the table went to the uncomfortably shifting subdued sisters. I'm responsible for them. I have to save them from that blistering idiot. House of Furt, what a joke. What a joke. What a joke. What a joke. We're nothing now, but he's acting like we're just back from the bloody Emperor's palace. Bitter frustration ripped through Arch's body like a blade she recalled being stabbed by during a quest. It tore through her arm and came out the other side, and stayed lodged there till the end of the fight when Hecaran pulled it free and Roberdike healed the wound. She recalled the way her body had shaken from the pain, and gentle hands embraced her. This will hurt, but not for long. Hecaran's promise had proved true in both parts. Her yowl of pain as the hobgoblin's sword when withdrawn had been accompanied by her own body's response to fear, and then the warm healing light from a warm, chubby-faced Roberdike had eased it all. This moment at the table of her fallen house with a foolish father and a desperate mother and two oblivious but anxious little girls filled her with the same dread and trembling as the sword being pulled out of her body. This is like the calm before a battle, Arch thought, and then every head turned when their head butler entered. A stiff, formal man with greying hair, he had served the Furt house since Sir Furt's father had been the family head. Though he always kept his own thoughts to himself, Arch had seen his eyes linger on her father's back more than once. He wished his grandfather were still in charge. Or so Arch believed, and more than once she herself had thought that if that were the case, they wouldn't be worse off. Announcing Lord Sebastian. The butler's dignified ringing voice carried to the table, and Sir Fert immediately composed himself, giving a light tug on the green vest he wore and clearing his throat. The waif-thin old butler stepped aside, and Arch got her first look at the man she was supposed to seduce. Old enough to be my grandfather. She saw that immediately, and yet the old man might as well have been carved out of steel, wearing a richly embroidered shirt of golden thread patterns that seemed to follow muscle contours on a solid ruby fabric. He was the epitome of high fashion. His white beard neatly trimmed and full around a square jaw, he had a distinguished air about him that screamed noble ancestry. "Thank you for having me," Sebos said, inclining his head politely as the butler saw him to a seat near Arch. "It's our pleasure to have our neighbor as the guest of the ancient house of Fert," her father said with such politeness that Arch could be forgiven for forgetting the frantic state he was in only minutes earlier. He extended his hand out across the table to each of the trio in turn. "This is my wife, Madame Fert, and my daughters, Quadrica, Eureka, and their oldest sister, Arch." The women at the table, down to the youngest two, stood as they were introduced and curtsied to their esteemed guest before reseating themselves properly on the dark wooden seats. The first course was wheeled out and silver trays laid down in the center of the table between the hosts and their guest. The server began to quietly ladle soup into small silver bowls while Sir Fert ignored her to speak to his visitor. Conversation danced around inanities about the capital, politics, and other matters for some time before at last the broke noble turned the subject to Sebos. "So, Lord Tian, where do you come from?" "A far-off country, unknown here, in search of fresh opportunities which I have thankfully found in abundance," Sebos said in such a way that Sir Fert was immediately interested. "I see. Well, the Empire is rich in opportunities for those with the right connections, and the right names," Sir Fert replied with a clever little smile adorning his slender face. "Subtle he is not," Sebos noted. "Of course you're right. The right name can be worth more than gold itself." "So true," Madame Fert said with a flash of pearl-white teeth when she smiled and placed a hand on her husband's wrist. A delicate, subtle gesture. "Was your wife unable to join you today, Lord Tian?" Madame Fert asked, keeping the hopeful edge from her voice. "That would have been quite impossible," Sebos said with a cool, dry voice, and the older couple felt the bottom fall out of their box of hopes. "Oh, is she ill?" Madame Fert asked. Sebos gave a teasing little understated smile in return. "No, she doesn't exist. I never married," he replied, and with their sudden hopes restored, the table let out loud laughs. The little ones giggled uproariously, unable to understand the joke. They were nonetheless charming in their own way. "So, are you rich?" Quadrica asked with a big smile on her face. "Quadrica, that's rude," Arch said and rapped her sister lightly on the knuckles with her palm. Sebos laughed when the little girl's lower lip trembled. He reached out and patted her head with an affectionate, forgiving gesture, and she immediately calmed. Sir and Madame Fert looked briefly aghast at their overly direct young daughter, and Sebos politely waved it away. "It's fine, that's not the normal sort of question, but children are quite direct, aren't they?" "No guile at all." Sebos gave the parents an indulgent, forgiving look. Then he looked down at the tiny girl next to him and answered, Yes, I'm very, very rich." "Why do you ask?" "Ah, it's getting late, isn't it? They should get to sleep," Arch said, shooting up to her feet with such force that she had to catch the chair before it could topple over. "You won't have your servant attend to that?" Sebos asked, and Arch froze, like finding an unexpected monster after having believed she'd cleared a dungeon. It was a mistake. Madame Fert, however, jumped in. "My daughter has a deep love for children, and her sisters are very attached to her. It may be improper, but perhaps there are worse things for a woman to feel for children, before she becomes a mother herself. Far, far more subtle than her father." Sebos privately praised the woman whose subtle touches and guided words were clearly meant to direct his attention to the eligibility of their eldest child and the usefulness of the Fert name. "I suppose that's true," he admitted, and recalled the way Lady Bukabaku Shagama fawned over her creations. "I have to admit, I am a little curious, having never seen a noble heir take care of children herself. Though I suppose it wouldn't be proper of a guest to go unescorted with the daughter of an esteemed house. Sabos chuckled as if it was a joke, but the more crudely minded Sir Fert waved the matter off. Not at all. You're a guest. Anything we can do to make your time with us pleasant is an option. Arch turned away while holding her sister's hands, desperate to hide her blush at the implied offering of her that her father made. I have to get these two away from him. Arch felt herself near tears within. What he would do with her, he would do with them. What wouldn't he trade for money or power? She asked, and did not like that she couldn't think of an answer. However, she kept that to herself as she took tiny hands into her own. Her sister's palms were soft as velvet, while her own were hard as leather turned into armor. How am I supposed to seduce a man like this? Arch had no answer to that either, but as she led the mewling little pair away, Sabos fell into step nearby. The hall was a little dustier than Sabos expected, but he let that pass unremarked upon as rude to say. Arch, however, didn't let it pass when she sensed his appraising look over the manor. We have cut back on our staff lately, she explained when they reached a golden door. I see. Sabos answered when Arch released her hold on Quadrica and opened the door with the little click noise of the catch being withdrawn with the turn of the knob. She entered with the twins and took them straight to a large bed. They have their own rooms, but, she shrugged, they like to be together. I know a pair of twin children, they're the same way, Sabos said with a brief reserved chuckle when he thought about Aura and Mare. Arch picked Quadrica up in both hands and flopped her onto the bed. Then did the same with Eureka. The bear bounced up and down on the soft fluff. Be careful, the monsters are coming, Arch said in a mock-threatening voice. The twins immediately snatched each other's hands and began a loud, fake snoring noise. Sabos cocked his head. Asleep in their regular clothes? The unspoken question found an answer in a rolling of Arch's eyes, and she pointed to the door. She walked out with the stealth that you'd expect of an experienced adventurer, and when Sabos followed, she gently closed the door. In a few hours, they'll wake up and pretend to have forgotten to change, and come to my room. They'll make up excuses to keep spending time with me, then I'll change them into their night clothes and then they'll finally go to sleep. Arch's eyes rolled again. It's absurd, I know, but she snapped her lips shut. But? Sabos asked. Can I give you a tour of my home, Lord Tian? Arch asked with a demure downward glance. Please do. He answered and waved toward the long hall away from the direction they'd come. Arch took the lead, and when she did, she began to roll her hips with every step. Sabos recognized what it was immediately. Lady Albedo does it often enough, though far more effectively. Compared to the level 100 succubus, Arch's effort at a seductive walk was clumsy as a chimp. Her steps were too far forward and threw off the rolling motion meant to draw a man's eye. She was clearly uncomfortable with the heels she wore that had disguised her short height. Everything about her was in conflict. But Arch was obviously trying. This is the library, she said when they entered the room, and immediately kicked herself for a fool for showing him. Some of the shelves were empty, and dust was obvious. It isn't used? Sabos asked. The large windows that were meant to let light in, revealed a bright night sky outside and an empty city street partially obscured by a low stone wall that kept the estate of the Fert house apart from the rabble and roads. Ah, well, my father says we should invest in things that show our nobility, and so he began selling off the oldest tomes a long time ago, while I was at school, Arch said with a flush to her face. The long open room was full of shelves, and at a glance Sabos could tell it had not been properly dusted in months or more. There were chairs of wood with cushy red velvet sewn into the seating and backs, and those were hidden beneath a layer of dust illuminated by glowstones and placed along the walls that betrayed the abandonment of this part of the home. I see. Sabos answered and looked down at her. Arch felt the look on the back of her head, and felt much like a child in trouble. She wrung her hands in front of her waist. You disagree? Sabos asked. A good noble's daughter supports her father's goals. Arch followed up, stiffly repeating her earliest lessons. But? The question from Lord Tian hung in the air. Arch felt the stare on the back of her head like it was a burning hot poker. She turned around, looked up at the old man and answered, but I disagree with him. I learned a lot in the academy, I studied magic there, all that I got for myself, I got because I studied. What did you study? He asked her with curiosity as they began to head toward the door. Her hand touched his arm and traced over its length. By the 6, He is carved out of steel. He'd probably give Hecarim a run for his coins if it came down to a battle of strength. Arch thought when her hand drew away from him. This way, I'll show you to the solarium on the top floor. It's a favorite spot, Arch said with genuine enthusiasm, especially at night, which is ironic given that it's supposed to be for sunlight. As you like, Sebos replied. Arch did her best to roll her hips. I should have studied that harder. Maybe asked Imina for tips on seduction. Should I have touched his chest? Ugh, if only my fingers weren't like leather. She cursed her hard body a dozen times before they reached the stairs. When she reached them, she answered his prior question. The stairs creaked a little with age, but the way up was lit by many candles which flickered their orange glow over the room and illuminated the shine of the steps that were still properly cared for. Arch tried to catch a glimpse of her company in the reflection to see if he was looking at her with any hint of desire, but his stone face was blurred. But even blurred, she should have seen some hint of manly want. Eyes falling a little too low, catching her swaying hips, or more. But there was nothing. I studied magic. I had a full scholarship there, and I was actually very good, Arch said with a defiant hint of pride she couldn't keep from her voice as they went up to the 4th floor, bypassing the rest of what she considered a mostly useless house. Really? You're quite young, aren't you? Sebos inquired. I'm 17, I know, I'm a little short, but Arch bit her lip and tried to appeal to the lecherous instincts she felt sure must be beneath the surface. The women in my family, we always look much younger than our years. She couldn't feel a single shift in the watching eyes behind her. Burning frustration roared through her heart. I'm failing. I need to step this up another notch. She thought to herself and tried to remember if the solarium had wine or not. The moon, the stars, a man and woman alone. Lots of wine. Arch quailed within, but her mother's admonition hit home once more. What will become of your sisters when the debts get called in, or if you go on a quest and don't come back? The question haunted Arch so much that just hearing it asked made her want to bawl. Instead, like the worker she was, she steeled her resolve and carried on. That is fortunate. Lord Tien said to her with neutral praise. Aye, yes, I think so. Arch responded and pointed down the long hall. It's just this way. Please don't let him be a lolicon. Or maybe that would work in my favor. It wasn't the first time she worried about that kind of thing. Everything about what she wore right now was imprisoning in its own way. Despite being covered as a noble woman ought to be, she felt uncomfortably displayed, and arguably worse, it seemed like it was failing. Humiliation was bad, humiliation with nothing to show for it was worse. So you studied magic? Sebos asked, and Arch's ears pricked up at the hint of interest. Yes, I can use up to the 3rd tier, and my master thought I had potential to learn more. I studied under Fluda Paradine, the preeminent magic caster of the Empire, if you're not familiar. Arch's voice rang with obvious pride, and she felt the first stirring of interest in her begin at her back. Is that so, then you graduated? Sebos asked, and Arch held back a relieved sigh when she reached the door she sought and could replace her answer with a simple, "Here we are." The door opened to a very short hall, which in turn led to another door. The hall was wide enough for only two to pass abreast, and gauging their path, Sebos guessed they were near the back of the estate, making the room they were about to enter into an outcropping. The room she opened up to him had a few small couches and seats, but it was utterly surrounded by windows. The room was large enough for no more than 6 to fit comfortably, and it was clearly meant to be intimate. The windows began at waist height and went up to form a dome of glass overhead. In the center of the room there lay a table, and Arch looked over her shoulder. "This is a nice feature," she said with a knowing smile and placed her hand on the round surface at the center, and the top of the table began to open up. "It's enchanted. It keeps wine bottles cooled to just the right temperature." "Okay Arch, you can do this, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it," she told herself, and bent far forward and began to bob her legs a little while she pretended to rummage for just the right bottle. "I never ever thought I'd be praying to the gods that a man old enough to be my grandfather would be checking out my ass." She bit her lower lip, grateful for her hidden face. "Quadruca and Eureka are on the line," she said to herself, and opened her legs a little more, but she didn't feel a tempted hand reach out to touch her. Instead she only heard him take a step within and seat himself on the couch. Our winter war has some beautiful nights, Sabos said, watching the twinkling stars and the bright white moon above.
Yes, it does,
Arch agreed, cursing her failure.
She drew out a bottle and a pair of glasses.
Sabos reached for a silk rope. No need to pull that and wake a servant, Arch said in a little lower voice. I'll pour for us both. She closed the top of the round table and set the glasses down, then broke open the narrow bottle and poured the red wine into the clear glass, making the only noise in the room, the sound of low sloshing. Fine, last arrow in the quiver, get him good and drunk. She handed him the glass and sat on the couch as close to him as she could, so that his arm naturally fell behind her on the polished dark wooden rim of the seat. The soft cushion gave under her slight weight, and she held out her glass. Do they toast where you're from, Lord Tian?
She asked.
Yes, Sabos said, she's trying very, very hard.
He thought,
and a bit of guilt over how far he was allowing her to go, rose up. Then, may we toast to new beginnings?
It's a favorite toast of mine, Arch replied.
As you like, to new beginnings then, Sabos said, a suitable one for me as well, all things considered.
To new beginnings.
Arch echoed and clinked her glass to his, the faint dink noise followed by them both taking a sip. So your parents must have been proud of your performance at the academy. I imagine you must have graduated near the top of your class. Not many magic casters ever reach the 3rd tier, let alone greater, Sabos said, and Arch mentally cursed. I didn't graduate, she said and looked up at the stars. I chose to put my talent to use. Talent? Sabos's ears pricked up again.
Yes,
I can immediately detect the tier of magic that someone or something is able to use. It's a particularly unique and powerful gift. Arch's humility gave way to pride again. The women in my family. We've always had children born with talents. My mother always knew the exact value of anything she touched. Her mother was always able to know exactly how to get where she wanted to go. Her brother was able to block any blow. Arch's voice was briefly enthusiastic, and then she had to look away to the night beyond the windows again when she felt the old man's eyes boring into her like Sabos was seeing her for the first time. He set his glass down, empty, and she refilled it, and went on talking about some of those in her history that she knew of. Each time it emptied, she refilled it again. A line of talent holders. How interesting. My master wants useful servants, and I think I may have found just the one. I can arrange for Fluda later, but for now, this one. Sabos thought as he memorized every word. Good, he's starting to see me as a woman. I just had to keep talking while he drank. Time to act. And then when Arch couldn't bring herself to finish the phrase her father used for wanton noble girls who got caught playing around, damaged goods, he'll have to marry me to make up for tainting a house. Even if we are fallen nobles, he wouldn't want that reputation just after getting here. Arch wasn't sure if she was reminding herself, reassuring herself, or trying to convince herself, but when he set his empty glass down again, she rose, turned to face him, and leaned forward to put her hand on his chest. That's hard too. Hopefully the rest. The Fallen noble daughter's intended act was to put on a sultry smile, which she managed a crude imitation of, and to then lower her hand, tracing it down to his waist and undo his belt. All right, this has gone far enough. Sabos decided. Let me show you how hospitable the Furtos is. Arch fumbled the words and tried to blink with heavy-lidded seduction that she hoped was aided by the bright lights given to them by the moon and stars. He put his hand over hers, and closed it around her wrist in a grip that, even gentle as it was, might as well have been binding chains. Enough, Sabos said in a voice of command that brooked no disobedience. At his words, the totality of her situation slammed down on her like the crack of a taskmaster's whip on the backs of a slave. I failed, humiliated myself for nothing. And now it's all over. I can keep being a worker. I can. Maybe make enough money, run with my sisters, then what? No. The looming black fate, darker than a starless night, coated her view of the future and made her earlier toast seem all the more bitter. She wanted to lower her hand, or to rush for his belt with the hand he didn't hold, but his voice was as steel as the rest of him. She knew intuitively it would do no good. The words hit her again. I failed. Arch's legs grew weak, wobbled, and she fell to her knees in front of the man whose hand still held her wrist, lowered her eyes, and tried not to cry against the waves of humiliation behind, and the growing sense of impending loss ahead. I have a proposal for you, Archie Browfurt, Sabos said with an unexpected gentle calm.